You, Ethics and Tech. Good to hear from Reverend Martin Todd Allen as usual. And I thank all the attendees here, especially the ones who've been to Ethics and Tech events before. It's always good to have you back. I apologize in advance. There might be a little bit of construction noise outside of my house today. There's nowhere else I can go though. So I'm going to get started now. We're going to talk today a little bit about lobbying in big tech. And faced with the looming specter of antitrust action by the federal government, big tech is simply trying to lobby and buy their way to their desired outcomes, which, as you may know, are very different than what's best for consumers and what's best for society. Last year, the House of Representatives released a major report calling on Congress to overhaul US antitrust laws and take action, especially to curtail the power of tech titans such as Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, the big four as we know them. The House Judiciary Subcommittee report on antitrust spent 16 months investigating big tech, resulting in a 450-page report that found the four tech companies wield abusive monopoly power and suggesting that lawmakers take steps to break them up. The report detailed a litany of anti-competitive practices that had become business as usual for companies that were once scrappy underdogs, startups that challenged the status quo, but which have now become the kinds of monopolies that we saw in the era of the oil barons, railroad tycoons, and other robber barons during the Gilded Age. Well, our founder, Vahid Razavi, says that a company like Amazon needs to be treated like Standard Oil and split into many pieces. I agree. That's one of the main principles that we have here at Ethics and Tech. It's a very powerful notion that's gaining a lot of steam, the grassroots activism, and is more possible now with the election of more progressive candidates to Congress. Faced with calls and actions and threats to them like these, what's big tech to do? What would anyone with as much money and power do in their shoes? Well, you'd fight back, of course. And the way you fight back in Washington is with money and with lobbyists, with lots of money and lots of lobbyists. Tech industry lobbying has increased dramatically in recent decades. For example, in 2012, Amazon ranked 221st among spenders on US federal lobbying. By 2019, it was number 18. In its race to consolidate monopoly power, big tech is investing in Washington, D.C., flooding the Capitol with campaign contributions and lobbyists. Public Citizen, the advocacy group founded by Ralph Nader in 1971, notes that the big four tech firms, Alphabet, Google's parent company, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook, have spent a combined $346 million in lobbying and campaign contributions during a recent 8-year study period. That's just four companies. When you expand the big four to five to include Microsoft, and when you expand the time frame to go back to 2005, the figure soars to a whopping $582 million. That's more than $500 million spent by some of the world's most powerful and influential companies trying to influence our government, our political system, our elected officials, our elections, and ultimately our very lives. According to the Public Citizen report, Facebook and Amazon are now the two biggest corporate lobbying spenders in the country. Big tech has eclipsed yesterday's big lobbying spenders like big oil and big tobacco. In 2020, Amazon and Facebook spent nearly twice as much as Exxon and Philip Morris, in fact, on lobbying. During the 2020 election cycle, big tech spent $124 million in lobbying and campaign contributions, breaking its own record from the past election cycle. Amazon and Facebook drove the most of this growth. From the years 2018 to 2020, Amazon increased its spending by 30%, while Facebook added an astounded 56% to its Washington investments. These big four tech companies recruited more lobbyists into their ever-growing army, increasing their ranks by 40% in 2020. Big tech PACs, political action committees, lobbyists, and employees contributed over 33% more in the 2020 election cycle than they did in the 2018 one. For instance, of over $4 million in funds and a total of nearly $16.5 million in contributions to the electoral cycle, marking the greatest cycle over cycle increase in campaign contributions from big tech in the 10-year span reviewed. The lobbyists aren't just numerous, they're also among the most influential in Washington. Among the 10 lobbyists who were the biggest contributors to the 2020 election cycle, half lobby on behalf of at least one of the big four tech companies. Together, 5 lobbyists alone contributed over $2 million just in the 2020 elections alone. Now, almost every member of Congress, 94% in fact, with jurisdictions over privacy and antitrust issues, you can guess, have received money from a big tech corporate PAC or lobbyist. In total, in 2020, big tech political action committees and lobbyists contributed about $3.2 million to lawmakers tasked with regulating them. Well, taking advantage of the corporate-friendly nature of all three branches of the federal government, big tech uses dark money organizations like trade organizations and 501c4s, not to be confused with 501c3s like ethics and tech, to accept unlimited and undisclosed sums of money from corporations. This money is then used to influence elections. Tech companies also fund academic research as well as think tanks whose findings and policies might just tend to be a little more sympathetic to big tech's agenda, giving their funding lifelines. In February, the House Judiciary Antitrust Committee convened hearings about competition in digital markets. Mondaire Jones, a progressive congressman from New York, grilled Tad Lipsky about the funding for his organization, the Global Antitrust Institute at George Mason University. When Lipsky obfuscated, the congressman noted that 60% of Global Antitrust Institute's 2019 budget relied upon donations from guess who? Corporations like Google and Amazon. Tech firms fund trade associations. They also fund advocacy groups. And of course, as I said, think tanks across the political spectrum, from the US Chamber of Commerce and the American Conservative Union, to the more centrist Brookings Institution, to the progressive-leaning Center for American Progress. At that February hearing, Jones concluded by warning that, quote, secret corporate funding has undermined our democracy, unquote. So why is lobbying so important to big tech? Well, it might seem obvious, but it's always good to hear it from their own mouths. Here's Brad Smith, President and Chief Legal Officer at Microsoft. I could tell you political spending plays an important role, not because the checks are big, but because the way political processes work. Politicians in the United States have events and they have weekend retreats. You have to write a check and then you're invited to participate. So if you work in the government affairs team in the United States, you spend your weekends going to these events. You spend your evenings going to these dinners. And the reason you go is because the PAC writes a check. But out of that ongoing effort, a relationship evolves and emerges and solidifies. I'm sometimes calling members and asking for their help on green cards or on visa issues. Wouldn't that be nice? Or on the issues around national security and privacy. There are times when I call people who I don't personally know and someone will say, you know, your folks have always shown up for me at my events and we have a good relationship. Let me see what I could do to help you, unquote. On the other side of the equation, here's former South Carolina Congressman turned Trump White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney explaining it. Quote, we had a hierarchy in my office in Congress. If you're a lobbyist who never gave us money, I didn't talk to you. If you're a lobbyist who gave us money, I might talk to you, unquote. I said on the other side of the equation, but what I probably should have said was on the other side of the revolving door. For all too often, as exemplified by Ajit Pai's FCC tenure, this is something that goes on all the time between government and big business. It's called the revolving door. The situation is dire. In healthcare and financial sectors, it's a big part of the reason why we don't have a Medicare for all style universal healthcare system or meaningful Wall Street performer accountability. But I digress. The Google Transparency Project notes that Google alone has hired 200 former US government officials over the past 15 years. The Center for Public Integrity notes that the number of DC lobbyists employed in the tech industry nearly tripled in one recent 5-year period alone. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, 93 out of 113 Alphabet lobbyists in 2018 previously worked for the government. And it's not just tech companies that employ lobbyists. Big tech-backed industry groups, including the Internet Association and the Information Technology Industry Council, also employ a virtual army of lobbyists. Not a virtual army, a real army. Their weapons aren't guns, their weapons are money, their weapons are influence. Big tech hires from all levels of government and vice versa. Witness former Vice President Al Gore, former Secretary of State and war criminal, I might add, since Reverend Todd has went down that road very, very admirably so. Well, they worked for the boards of Apple and Dropbox, respectively, or former Google chairman Eric Schmidt serving on 3 US government advisory boards at one point. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported just yesterday that Oracle's Larry Ellison, he's no longer CEO, but he's still, I believe he's the chief technology officer now. But anyway, he's offered former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, another war criminal, I might add, a very lucrative board position that could be worth as much as $400,000. As policy analyst Carlota Alfonsi has noted, tech stock prices tend to respond positively to these kind of appointments. Tech lobbying and political spending are inimical to democracy. They're inimical to equality. And this is demonstrated not only by the Supreme Court aided corporate domination of our nation's political agenda, as writ large by the Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commission decision, but also with deadly clarity at the US Capitol on January 6th. 147 Republican members of the United States Congress voted to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, promulgating Donald Trump's big lie in an attempt to subvert what remains of our democracy in an even more dangerous way, I would submit, than the MAGA horde that stormed the Capitol on January 6th. How's that more dangerous, you ask? Well, in the wake of the deadly Capitol attack, Airbnb, Amazon, AT&T, Comcast, NBC Universal, Google, Intel, Oracle, Verizon, and other tech and tech-adjacent companies pledged that they would suspend donations to GOP election objectors. These are the people that tried to object to the certification of Joe Biden's electoral college victory, whether we love him or we hate him. And at Ethics and Tech, we've got a lot of criticism of the Biden administration, but he won the election. And it was the job of the electoral college to certify that victory. These 147 Republican members of Congress, aided by President Donald Trump's incitement, aided by the January 6th attack on the Capitol, they tried to stop this. And so many Americans were rightfully outraged, and many corporations said that they would do the right thing and they would stop giving money to Republicans who supported the move. However, AT&T, Intel, and Oracle subsequently gave tens of thousands of dollars to Republican committees that support election objections. They could claim that they weren't giving the money directly, but their promise, they violated their promise in spirit, if not in word. Tech companies also tried to lobby California's Internet Consumer Protection and Net Neutrality Act of 2018 to death. In the wake of the Trump administration's destruction of net neutrality under former Verizon General Counsel turned FCC Chair Ajit Pai, an ominous policy whose implementation itself was the result of intense tech lobbying, state legislatures, including our own here in California, moved to enact state-level laws to protect net neutrality. Consumer advocates, progressive lawmakers, and smaller internet companies with some conscience like Mozilla fought hard for state-level net neutrality legislation. Our California Net Neutrality Act bars internet service providers from blocking or throttling lawful traffic, paid prioritization, paid zero rating, and other policies and practices that exacerbate the digital divide and other inequalities. Working to, quote, stop at nothing to destroy net neutrality for good, unquote, in the words of Fight for the Future. 4 telecom lobbying groups representing the nation's most powerful internet providers and cable companies tried like hell to stop the state's gold standard open internet legislation from taking effect. They failed. They failed for a variety of reasons, but first and foremost, they failed because of us. Grassroots organized, not Ethics and Tech necessarily, but grassroots organizing and activism by groups including Ethics and Tech, by groups like Electronic Frontier Foundation, Fight for the Future. This grassroots pressure resulted in California's net neutrality law. It was also grassroots pressure that led to San Francisco's ban on the use of facial recognition technology by police and other government agencies. And it will be grassroots pressure that will break the stranglehold that corporations and moneyed interests have on what's left of our democracy. The situation is dire, but I leave you today with hope. I leave you today with a call to action to get involved in groups like Ethics and Tech, whether that be with your time, your expertise, and I know Ethics and Tech people have a lot of people who come to these events have a lot of expertise. Talk to a lot of you. With your money, with whatever it is that you can best contribute to the cause for organizations that are fighting the good fight. Because make no mistake, friends, big tech is not going to do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. Vahid could tell you about that from his time at Amazon. They're not going to do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. They're going to do the right thing because the power of people just like you, just like all of us, standing in solidarity, standing up for what's right and forcing them to do it. Thank you very much for coming to this event today. And yeah, thank you very much.